Hello, everyone. Welcome to Someone Would Buy My Business. I'm your host, Amber Christian, and this is our podcast that's all about buying and selling artisan businesses. And so I bring in a whole series of guests, some experts, some people that have bought, some sold businesses, anything and everything around immersing yourself in this topic. And we all like to have a little bit of a sense of humor because it all came from an artisan that said to me, we hope none of us realize anyone would ever want to buy our businesses. So that was the genesis of the title of our show. Today, I am delighted to welcome Leanne from Stitchcraft Marketing. And we're going to get all nerdy about a variety of things on the marketing topic. So welcome to the show, Leanne. And can you introduce yourself and tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about Stitchcraft Marketing?
Yeah. Thanks, Amber. I'm super excited to be here with your guests today, your listening audience. I'm Leanne Pressly, and I'm the founder and CEO of Stitchcraft Marketing. We are a niche agency that I started in 2009, and we focus solely on craft companies. So our clients are typically in the fiber or the fabric space. So quilt companies, yarn distributors or manufacturers, designers, independent makers, really anybody that's in that craft space that needs help with marketing can be our client. And within that niche, we even have another specialty, which is strategy and execution of social media programs. So we help clients with their Instagram accounts, their Facebook, their digital advertising, their blogging, their newsletters, video editing, really anything that goes in the internet space is what we do best.
hmm So that's all sorts of interesting things. So in the time that you have had your company and grown it, I'm sure you've seen a few people buy and sell some businesses
Oh, yeah.
in that time frame. And so let's start to get into some components about thinking about, let's zoom out a little bit and let's think about kind of marketing maturity. So let's
Okay.
say someone's coming and is thinking about selling their business. And how do you start to help someone who's thinking about selling their business assess what their marketing maturity looks like? Do you have kind
Mhm.
of a scale or some
Mhm.
processes, or how do you help companies kind of figure out where they're at in terms of
Mhm.
their overall marketing maturity as a company?
Yeah, great question. Are we assuming that all of these businesses are already profitable and showing a bottom line? Because if not, that's the first question that I would ask is,
Ah,
do you
okay.
even have something to sell? Most people don't want to buy a job. They want to make an investment. They want to buy a
hmm
business, which most of us hope and aspire to own a business that gives us a level of freedom, right? We don't
hmm
just want to buy someone's job. So, what do your numbers look like in terms of that net number, that EBITDA, that bottom line,
hmm
so that if I'm coming to buy your business, is there enough revenue there or enough money at the bottom line to generate a salary for me? Do I get a retirement fund? Do I get dividends? Do I have enough money on that bottom line to actually grow the business? Can I bring on new other people? So that to me is a really important variable
hmm
before we start talking about the marketing is, are you profitable? Are you not profitable? I would say if you're listening, you're watching this show and you're in the I am not profitable or I am losing money bucket, that's going to be your first challenge. And obviously,
hmm
marketing plays hand in hand with that. You've got to have great marketing in order to generate the revenue to have a healthy business. So if you are in the bucket of, yep, I'm healthy, I'm making money, I'm profitable, then that marketing maturity is the next place that we would look. And I love that phrase, marketing maturity. It's, where are you on that spectrum of beginning baby business to
hmm
maybe middle of the spectrum to a more mature business that's really got everything kind of dialed in. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about processes and systems and so on. But when I think about marketing maturity, it's, well, what's your social footprint look like? That's kind of
hmm
the first question. Do you have a significant amount of followers on your social channels? Have you been consistent with your posting? Conversely, are you the kind of person that you started Pinterest 5 years ago and you haven't pinned since? As a buyer, that could be a detriment, but it could also be an opportunity. So if you are listening and you're like, oh gosh, she sees me, I haven't posted on my Pinterest in 5 years, It's okay, because a buyer might also come into that and think blue sky, right? That's the term we
Right.
use for the potential to grow the business. What the current owner hasn't really capitalized on, we call blue sky. So if I see that you haven't done anything with your Pinterest account, I might come into your business and think, oh, well, I'm going to put my foot on the gas with Pinterest and I'm going to take this business to the next level. So I'm not saying you have to have stellar social channels across the board and really robust, strong, high newsletter lists, all of those different metrics that we're looking at. I'm not saying that. But we need to know where you are on the spectrum of that marketing maturity.
Are you even producing a regular newsletter? Are you actually doing some kind of posting? Is it consistent? Because I know I've talked to a number of artisans and they say, "Yeah, I'm all over the place on platforms," and I was like, "Ooh,
Yeah,
depends on what you're trying to build." And when it comes to actually creating something that you want to sell, you have to be a little bit more kind of thoughtful and intentional. And maybe some platforms are better for that than others because they're a little more known for that. But
right.
in terms of how you kind of build out that brand, and so social media is kind of that first component about what are you doing or not doing, because it might create a blue sky opportunity. What else should people think about in terms of, as we look at marketing maturity and start to think
Mhm.
about what they're doing, what else would you suggest that people start to think about?
Well, I think one of the other areas that we teach a lot about at Stitchcraft Marketing is your customer avatar, which
Hmm.
is another way to say your target customer, your ideal persona. There's a couple of different phrases that you might hear thrown about, but essentially it is, how well do you understand your target customer? And in crafts, sometimes we have the same customer. So typically, she is a she, and she is older. She might have disposable income. She might, let's just say a quilter, for example. We know, for example, that they're 65 and older is the typical quilter. Do you, as a business owner, really understand her? Do you know where she is on social media? Do you know how she buys? Do you understand her customer journey? Do you know what her pain points are? For example, is she budget conscious? Is she a big spender? Is she a frequent shopper? Like all of those different things that you need to understand about your avatar. And we categorize them into 4 quadrants at Stitchcraft Marketing. So it's your characteristics, your
Hmm.
demographics. And then we also look at hopes and fears of our
Okay.
customer. So, a business owner, a crafty business owner that really understands all 4 of those elements of your customer. And when you're selling, you can articulate that to your buyer. I think you're going to be well ahead of the game in being able to hand that over to a new buyer and say, yep, here's who she is, here's how she shops, here's what her sensitivities are, here's how you can appeal to her hopes, here's how you help her talk her off the ledge with her fears. If you can come in with a really good understanding of all that information, that's amazing.
Could you give us an example? Can we go a little deeper on that? I like
Yeah,
how
sure.
you've gotten those.
Yeah.
You've got it very pragmatically laid out into, hey, these 4 quadrants, and so it gives you very particular things to answer. But
Okay.
elaborate on an example of what that might look
Okay.
like.
So let's do business A and business B. Business A is more of a luxury brand. And I'll just make all of this up. Business A is a luxury brand that's selling high end fibers for hand knitters. It's cashmeres. It's luxury, locally sourced alpacas. It's just say the high end. They get the best designers coming in. They've got exclusives. That kind of a customer might not be price sensitive. She doesn't care what it costs. She's got to have that locally sourced or imported cashmere. She just loves everything about it. I don't care what it costs. I'm gonna pay for that. Business B might have an avatar that is, maybe she's a little bit younger in age. Maybe she's a millennial, or what we would call a Gen Zennial, Gen Z or a millennial, someone a little younger, more price sensitive, right? These are the folks that are struggling to pay their student loans. These are the folks that can't quite afford a house yet. Well, she is price sensitive, right? So she's going to need more affordable, lower price point kits. She also might be at that time in her life where she's got kiddos at home and she's a customer that needs quick projects that she can do after she puts the kids to bed. So she needs more kits and more quick fix types of things, right? So there's a big difference between business A's customers and business B's customers. Even though they're both selling, let's say they're both even selling yarn and patterns or crochet stuff for crochet and knitting, you're going to approach customer A lot different than customer B. And so a business owner
Mhm.
that really has that solid understanding of how to sell to those individual types of crafters, again, is going to put them ahead of the game. So same crafts, same hobby, same similar products, but much different way that you approach your customer in those two business scenarios.
Mhm. And I think that the key to something Leanne's really getting at here too is so often I hear artisans talk about, well, I like to make this thing. But the shift she's talking about is when you're really creating a business and something that you want to sell, it's really about who you're selling to. You're kind of looking for this I say you're looking for a sweet spot of overlap of things you like to make along with the customers you want to sell to.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
if you haven't really thought about who they are and put those personas around it, it's really hard to figure out what should your marketing plans look like because you're like, well, I sell to everyone. Ay, 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 boil the oceans. That's tough. It's really tough if you have what I call that a boil the ocean strategy,
Yeah.
where it's like
Yeah.
truly everyone isn't your customer.
No. I say if
And
you're selling to everyone, then you're selling to no one.
to no one. Exactly. Exactly. So that's a good thought process around you really have to understand who they are. And maybe you may have more than one persona,
Absolutely.
depending
Yeah.
on what your products are. But I
Mhm.
think your key is you need to know who they are, you need to call them out, and you probably need it written down so that it's
Absolutely.
really front and center as to exactly who you sell to.
Yeah. And we go so far as to name our avatars. And as a business owner, you might have multiples. You might have a Carol and a Marianne and a Sheila, and they're all a little bit different, right? I have a great story once of a client that came to us and was very similar to the type A company I just described. Very high end, selling exclusive yarns, mostly coastal LA and New York. And she came to us because she was very frustrated that there was this whole other market of consumers that was purchasing her yarns because it was this gorgeous mohair and mohair blends. And what she came to discover was that this Waldorf community, people that were making handmade dolls for Waldorf children, people in that community, were buying the yarns to make dolls as hair. And she was
Huh.
very offended by this, even though it represented more than 50% of her business. She just got out there as having this amazing product for this Waldorf community, and she really resisted it. And I always say, yep, you may want to fish for a certain type of customer. You may have your heart set on, I only want the exclusive high end luxury knitwear design types that are in LA or New York. But you know what? If the Waldorf people come knocking and with their wallets open, then you have to recognize that as another possible avatar for you. And again, as a seller, you want as many, shall we call them swim lanes, as possible for a buyer. You
Mhm.
want to tell the buyer, not only do I have the exclusive high end customers in New York and LA, but I also have this other community of Waldorf customers because your buyer is going to want to see multiple streams of revenue coming in, not just the one. So
Mhm.
if you have multiple avatars, that's absolutely perfect and almost more desirable.
Yeah, because that's a very good point you're getting at too, even in the diversity of the customer base. Like you could be, I often talk about diversity in your revenue base, and sometimes I will talk about like wholesale versus retail versus other things. But what you're talking about is even in that end consumer base diversity within that via the different avatars that you have is
Hmm.
going to make a buyer a little more comfortable because like if they had
Right.
only the low end customers in an economic economic pullback, they may not spend. And that's a riskier proposition for someone who's going to buy that business than someone that says, no, I've got this set, this set, this set, and I know distinctly who they are and roughly how much of my revenue they make up. And that actually helps a buyer go, well, there's a lot less risk in that
Exactly.
because they've got, even on the consumer sales side, many more distinct avatars that they're selling to. So it's a interesting way of describing it. Now, if you haven't done that as a seller, you're going to get that taken care of. But what other processes do you typically see in some of the more mature companies?
Hmm. Well, we touched on the topic of systems and processes. I think that's
Hmm.
also a really, really important thing that you're offering to your buyer, which is if something were to happen to the owner, let's say me, I'm the one and only founder and CEO of the agency. If I were to happen to, unfortunately, something happened to me and I couldn't run my business anymore, do you have the systems and processes in place to have someone step in and take my place? Right. And when you're selling your business, that's what's going to happen. You're going to step out, the
Hmm.
buyer's going to step in. Right. And so we use, for example, Trello, which
Hmm.
is a project management platform, and everything, every single moving part of the entire agency is in Trello. And we have SOPs set up,
Yep.
which show what those steps are to do a certain task. We have not only written, but also video showing, let's say, for example, how do you send out an invoice, right? And you
Hmm.
can think of all the different moving parts of your business. Every different category and section of running your business needs to be documented and filed away in a system, and there has to be a process. And that's essentially what you're going to be selling to your new buyer, right? They don't want to come into a business and buy something that's 100% in your head. They
Hmm.
don't want to do that learning curve. They want all of that laid out for them. So that's probably the next most important thing is, do you have systems and processes in place that are readily available to hand over to a new buyer?
Hmm. I think that's a big one that you've added here because, and especially recordings, documentation and
Mm-hmm.
recordings, and sometimes even a little video recording of showing like how you do the thing with some of
Exactly.
the various tech is actually really important because how you might describe it or write it, that might be like, I have no idea what they are talking about. And then you see, oh, that's what they mean by that. And so it's also a very good point for people that are thinking about selling their business is, to what extent would you be able to just do a knowledge transfer session that says this is what the marketing looks like, and you may not be there yet, but you might have to say, hey, I've got to craft a plan for getting that documented. And that's a very tangible, how do we do the postings, what is the some of the strategies around it, and what our processes look like. It's part of creating an asset that you can actually sell.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
And I think for people that are like, I don't know how to even begin that, how I began it and how I hear other people do it is just start tracking your time. Do a little note card or a little notebook and write down what you do in any given day. So it might be some accounting, some yarn dyeing, some social media posting, some HR hiring stuff, whatever those categories are. Just start to document what you do throughout your day for a whole week. And then you'll start to see maybe groupings and categories of common tasks that you do to run your business. And then from there, you can set up a structure and say, oh, here's all the things I do for HR. Here's all the things I do for accounting and billing. Here's all the things I do to actually make my product, and so on down the line.
hmm And the important part about that, I love that, because the important thing there is you actually have an authentic measurement of your time. Because as a person selling a business, buyers will ask, well, how much time do you spend on the business? And trust me, they know when you're lying. Like they know when they're like, no way are they doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes apparent really quickly, but you said, hey, you know what? I systematically sat down, kind of measured it out, and this is what the time is. You have it tracked and measured, and that's the facts based on that time that you spent, and it actually makes you more compelling to a person that's buying it because they're like, oh, look, they actually sat down and tracked this, and they actually and they can maybe tweak the numbers with efficiencies or other things,
Yes, right.
but you at least know what that looks like. And so they're getting a more clear picture of the kinds of things you really were doing on a day in, day out basis with that business.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, we've given people a lot of food for thought already.
Yeah,
They're probably going to
yeah.
be like,
Yeah, and one other thing I would say you made me think of just now is I talk to a lot of clients that have so much trouble giving up control. When you are the
mhm,
founder and it is your baby and it is your business and you get a sense of comfort from having all that stuff in your head, retaining all that intellectual property just in your head, and you get a sense of security from being in control, that is a detriment to you.
mm,
Because again, if you can't hand that over, no one's going to buy your business. So the more that you can delegate and the more that you can train others to do those different elements in your business, the more attractive it's going to be for a buyer.
mhm. And I think there also really a difference between a person who hasn't necessarily hired another person to do it. They're still doing it themselves, and because of timing or trying to maintain profitability in a business because they don't
Right.
want to give that up yet, versus
Mhm,
that person that's
mhm.
retaining it because they don't want to give up the control. And so even for people thinking about this, there's a big difference between the person that's holding on because of control or the person that's holding on because they're just trying to maintain some profitability, or they're not quite ready to outsource it yet, but they have everything documented and what they're
Right.
doing is actually well
Sure.
documented. And so there's a difference between that.
Yeah.
Just because you haven't outsourced it, that's not necessarily bad,
Right.
as long as you can track it, can outsource it. And so I think
Absolutely.
there's a distinction between those two for
For
people to
sure.
say, oh, we're not saying you have to have hired someone, but we're saying it has to be able to be given to someone else
Yeah. Right.
to do, because that's what will happen once you actually
Yeah.
sell it.
Yeah.
So much good food for thought here. I feel like we're probably going to make people's heads go ah!
Yeah.
with all the
It's a lot to think about.
um, yes, and for people that haven't started to document some of their marketing processes, just based on things that you've seen about, and I realize your mileage may vary depending on how committed and focused people are, but how long does it usually take most people to kind of get
Mm.
through some of that documentation?
Mm. People aren't
And
gonna like my answer for that. I would
but
say
let's tell the
at the
truth.
minimum, I would say a year, probably,
Okay. Yep.
right?
Yep.
Because things ebb and flow, people have seasons, especially in our industry. So
Yeah.
things are gonna be different in the summer. You're gonna run your business differently if you're a yarn company, for example, than you are in the height of knitting season, of fiber season. So I would say a minimum of 1 year so you can capture the full spectrum of what happens each quarter in your business. And I think because people are so busy running their businesses, you should be thinking about selling your business at least 3 years in advance. At
Yes.
least. Some people
Yep.
say 3 to 5 years is what your
Yeah.
goals, where you should start thinking about. So let's say 1 to 3 years is going to be how long it will take you to really start from the day you say, I want to sell my business to the point that you're really ready to hand it off to someone else.
Yep. And 3 to 5 years is pretty typical, actually, in my experience from other industries as well. And initially, if you're thinking you might want to sell it someday, you should actually start the work to prep for it now, even if you don't sell it, because it is a multi-year process
Yeah.
to get it prepared to in order to maximize what you can get for it. Yeah, sure, you might get further down the road, but you're not going to get as much for it if you don't get all these things in place. And so that's the key is we want to help people maximize what they can get for their business and put your best foot forward so that the best buyers come forward when you're selling it. And so
Right.
I would absolutely agree with that. It's a years long process. And so if you even have an inkling that you might want to sell it, you might want to start thinking about getting your processes documented.
Yes, for sure.
Um,
For sure. Yeah.
well, this has been great and super helpful. I don't want to completely overwhelm people, and we already gave them several things to think about at
Yes,
this
you did.
point. How do people find out more about Stitchcraft marketing? How do they follow you on socials? Can you share all that information?
Yeah, sure. So we are at stitchcraftmarketing.com, exactly like how it sounds. And all of our socials are at that same address as well. And we have tons of information for crafty business owners. We do a blog twice a month. We do a podcast. I have over 100 episodes on business of craft, which you can find on any podcast platform. And our website, again, has white papers and lots of blog information for folks that want to continue their business owning journey in the craft space.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you,
today,
Amber. It was
Leanne.
fun. Anytime.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you to all of our listeners. And we'll be back with our next episode next week. Until
Thanks,
then.
everybody. Take care.
Mhm.